Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jeremy. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you too. Shirt's back.
Looking good.
People writing in, wondering what happened last week, but yeah, basically forgot it.
It's nice. It looks starchy, clean, bright white, Persil white. Other brands are available.
Yeah, I suppose. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market. Today we have the second part of our interview with Jonathan Clark, and we're going to focus around culture and things like that. But before we play that interview, let's get into the news, Ben. So I've got a bit of news this week. It's pretty good news, really. That festivals are back. So yeah, the announcements on Monday from Boris about the timetable. At least we have a rough timetable. Whether it comes to fruition or not, at least we have some kind of hope. But yeah, festivals are back.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I spoke to one of my sons this week, and he's a quite a politically astute, I think, follows all that stuff. And I said, what do you think then of the announcement? And he said, unbelievable, Dad. Festival's going ahead. That was it. So, and there's a kind of serious point here, isn't there? Because actually what I think it has done now is that, as much as they say it's not about dates, for business it is about dates, and for the certainty and the planning. And I've been, as you have been, speaking to a lot of people this week, and I think most people are saying they feel now we can actually start to plan things, recruitment, offices. Do we go back? So in a way, all of this has been on hold until now. So this is a sign of, almost giving us back our kind of independence, to make decisions, which has been taken away by the government. And I guess it's going to fray quite badly. It must be extremely difficult for the politicians now as they try and hold this together, because momentum will start, I think, unless something else happens and it all goes back to square one, which would be awful. But it's yin and yang. I was saying to somebody this morning, it's you can't be both negative and positive at the same time. And I feel positive. I've got to.
Yeah, I do as well. I mean, we're an events business, so for us, I mean, we're looking at the autumn now, thinking, yeah, all systems go for physical events now.
You'd have a physical event, would you? Do you think now?
Yeah, a London Market Claims penciled in for October 9th. So
great, I'll be there if I'm invited, obviously.
Yeah, of course you are. But yeah, we're thinking that'll be a physical event. I think the only question mark is, I think, the appetite for people to get together for these type of events. Obviously, I've highlighted festivals here, and they're predominantly young people. We're young at heart, but we're not young in the COVID bracket. But I think
I'm not saying we're predominantly old, although we are, obviously.
Yeah, we are.
Insurance.
But it will be interesting to see the appetite for people to get back to real world events, conferences, and for our age and our generation. I think there is a pent up desire to meet people. I certainly feel it, and when I talk to people, there's a desire there. So yeah, we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I picked this out another reason, Ben, because I know you like getting on stage.
Yeah.
So
look at that.
That was you at Glastonbury. Yeah, that was good. So my other bit of news, which I forgot to share last week. So this poll was taken at Virtual Tintech London Market a couple of weeks ago now, and we just polled the audience to ask what the biggest challenge was in delivering transformational change. And actually it ties in with the theme today around culture, because the top answer here is cultural inertia, followed unsurprisingly by legacy technology, given it was a technology conference. But actually, given that it was a technology conference, it is interesting that that those people put culture and culture change and mindset at the top of the agenda in terms of delivering successful transformation. And yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about that today, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of brings us on to your news, Ben, which is the Lloyd's Culture Survey, I think.
Yeah, so this week, if people remember, in 2019, after all the Bloomberg expose and other things, Lloyd's, John Neal launched a survey, which was the Culcha survey, which had come from the banking industry. So there was quite a lot of discussion about this, and there were some initial findings which largely corroborated the fact that there were a number of serious issues in the market. And so what we've just had from Lloyd's is the publication of the next wave of data based on a pretty big sample, pretty decent sample of about 6,000 responses. Now 60% of those are men, and around 60% of those are men, not precisely, but about that, and about 40% odd are women. So there is an inherent kind of bias within this when you look at some of these numbers. And I do want to be perhaps a little bit boring and researchy, but I do think this is quite important because one of the senior lawyers actually at Clyde & Co said at the time that this is possibly a good idea, but these things can become a bit tick boxy, and I tend to agree with that. I think they can be just supporting the institutional viewpoint, and I have some concerns about this survey. So first of all, as you can see in this article from Insurance Journal, their take is survey results show a more inclusive culture, but improvement still needed. Now that's at the backdrop, and Lloyd's accepts this, of mostly COVID. So much of this survey would have been done during the COVID period because we've had a year, and everything they look at talks about people's experiences over the last 12 months. So some of this would have been pre-COVID, some of it would not. And I think we've got to, you kind of got to look at the context always of these things, is that in COVID, most people have been sitting at home. So I don't imagine that many of the issues that we're tilting at here or trying to find out about are going to be, issues. So the drinking culture, that sort of stuff is probably not going to have been a major issue for most people. It certainly wouldn't have been for me. So I think that there are some quite important things here. Now, one of the things I was particularly interested to look at, because we obviously do surveys and we do an underwriter ranking, which we'll talk about in the next few weeks, and there's been some quite strong kind of representations from women to us about the lack of women in that underwriter ranking. Now, we just do it as a survey, and we don't, we try and have it as an objective survey, but we recognize that, and we now have a women's ranking. But still, the latest data does not show a massive amount of movement on that in terms of the number of women underwriters being mentioned. So I'm still quite concerned about it. And then one of the areas in here, and I won't talk about the whole survey because we haven't got time, because they bring up the BAME issue. They say now is another one they want to add to the agenda because that's come through, which is, it's just fair enough. I completely get that. And it, links in with some of the sort of social discourse and issues that we've had over the last year. But the gender one is really quite important. And one of the things that Lloyd states, and it's my beef with this a bit, is that you can't get to the data, and it's about transparency. You get we're getting what we're told are the results. But I can tell you that is not the whole story, because gender balance, women's perception. So Lloyd has said women's perceptions have improved by 7 points across all characteristics. That's fine. There was also a 5-point improvement in the percent of respondents, that's all people who answered this survey, in terms of believing that people do not have equal opportunities. In other words, people are saying it's getting better, we do have more equal opportunities. But they don't show the number of women answering that question. Now, I think there must be a reason for that. And I think the reason is that that's not moved, or it's gone backwards. And it doesn't suit the argument that things are getting slightly better or better. And I think that's a shame, because, actually the really important statistic, and I would have gone straight to this as a researcher, I'd have said, what's the figure for women in terms of how they feel about gender balance and equal opportunities? And I'm afraid if I'd seen that number and said it's gone backwards, I would have said, whatever we do, we've probably got to be honest and show that up front and deal with it. And maybe Lloyd's, if they're listening to this, can answer that question. And it has gone up. If it's gone up and got better, then say it, for God's sake. Don't. And if it hasn't, then just be honest with us. and address the issue, because it isn't about this is a bias survey, and that more men answer it than women as well. So, that's just the way it is, and that's fine. But I think it's a shame. I just think it's a shame. And I can see, if you start doing this, if you start saying we'll choose some numbers and not others, then I can tell you in 2 or 3 years, this will not be worth the paper it's written on. And because people will stop, they'll stop believing it. And regardless of all of that, the press didn't exactly come out and say this was a great story. They said there's a lot more. And some of the press was, particularly the Telegraph, came out saying, and you're going to show some stuff in a minute, but, saying it was still bad.
Yeah. And this one, I just cropped off the insurer. Later, Culcha still shows improvements, but booze and bullying still prevalent. Like you said at the beginning, I'm not entirely sure how they worked that out, if we've all been at home for the majority of the time this survey was conducted.
Well, I don't think they're managed. I think there's, I think you do, as we said last week, we talked with Jonathan actually about data and how you need to present it in a certain way. And I don't think that means making it up or, pulling the wool over people's eyes. I think you present it so that people can understand it, and I think here you've got an article which says booze and bullying still prevalent. Well, even if you didn't know anything about anything at the moment, you'd say that would be quite hard, as you just said. So you've kind of got to wonder about the headline. But equally, what is the point of this survey? Because it seems to me you've got to start to talk about targets. You've got to say we set some targets to achieve, not just here's a survey which there's been a 4-point movement, which is what it is. That's reportage. That's not telling me or interpreting anything for me. And I think it's about leadership in a way. I think if Lloyd's is going to lead on this, when it's doing surveys like this, it doesn't just go, the survey sits over there and, hey, great, 4-point increase or 4-point, I think they've got to take much more responsibility and accountability and say, we set the target, John Neal did that. He said these things. If the improvement has got to be 10% a year, then say that, but there isn't any of that. There's no context. There's no what's good, what's bad. So really, I'd love to get in there and tell them to control this, because it's just going to fall apart, because the insurer says booze and bullying still prevalent. Some other article says, oh, it's getting a bit better, and that's good. And Lloyd says, oh, it's getting a bit better, probably. We're not moving forward. And the important thing here isn't surveys, it isn't what Lloyd says, it's what happens to real people. And we're about to come out of this pandemic, hopefully. And I think people will now be saying, okay, so is it any better? Is Culcha better? And we're going to be talking about this in a minute. But
yeah,
it's a real shame.
It feels like a
poor management, I think, of this, in my view.
And a lost opportunity to show a different style, I suppose, around that transparency topic you touched on as well. I think
it's serious stuff, Jeremy, isn't it? This and
really important, isn't it?
It's serious stuff, and Lloyd's have put an infographic up. Now, I don't mind an infographic now and again, but I think it needs something more serious than that. I think it needs something with more gravitas. I think it needs John Neal addressing each of those findings, and I think it needs some kind of flagship findings that say we're getting better. And those should be the ones that the press pick up and challenge or not challenge. But at the moment, it's just like, oh, we've got a bunch of findings and some of them are getting better, and we won't show you some others probably because they don't suit the story. And I think that's just the worst way to manage this thing. I mean, that's my view.
Good, right. So that's our news. Let's get on to the second part of the interview that we had with Jonathan Clark. Now we're picking it up here. Now Jonathan goes on to talk about culture and diversity. He has just answered Ben's question about data scientists and the types of roles and skills and competencies that we'll see in the future. And then he goes on to talk about culture. So I will play the clip now, and then we'll come back.
To the question that Jeremy's raised about the vision, how do we actually really get down to it? Well, firstly, we've got to be inclusive. We've got to recognise that the new world skills we need data people do not come in one size. Yeah, they may well be very different to many of the people that we've traditionally been used to working with. They may not wish to come to work in a suit. They'd quite like to, whatever it might be, but they will be different people, and we have to learn that lots of different backgrounds, lots of different attitudes are needed in that new world. To your point, Ben, absolutely, because data scientists come, in multiple sizes. So, the actuaries, the brilliance that they've got towards somebody who can just look at data and say, hang on a minute, what's happening there?
Yeah,
and I think that. That's the skill. Really quality underwriters have been able to look at a presentation and really get to the heart of that's where the risk is. And that was a skill that they had. Now, as we enter this new world, I think we've got to build that skill. And I think it's absolutely spot on. But it means we've got to be very inclusive of the skills we're going to be drawing in. And again, I think we are behind the curve on technology. And if we're going to work on technology, we have to have people who can get the best from it. And again, that's very easy to say, but it's more than just, can I analyze data? It's about how can I really use this technology? And I think this cuts to some of the point you're raising there, Jeremy, about why don't we get things to happen? It's because perhaps we overthink it sometimes, but we need people who are really good at getting the best out of that technology. And who understand and then have a senior enough role to be allowed to do it. And then I think the sort of, as you start to look at that, and you start to build a more compelling story for movement. But I think I agree entirely with what you're saying, Ben, but that it is about data needs to be analysed in many different ways. And we are going to have to look for people that are good at doing that. And also people who are good at trading. I think occasionally we forget insurance is about deal making.
Yeah,
it's not about forcing sales, but it's about trading with people, and they want to trade risk with us for some form of promise. And that's that trading. Sometimes I think we lose a little bit. We get a bit over academic about it, but ultimately we have to trade as well. And that data skill of trading is the stuff we would recognise in great underwriters.
Yeah.
And we had Bruce Carman on, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, Ben? And he was saying almost exactly the same thing, apart from stolen your thunder there, but about, scratching the surface and asking the question about what's really going on. And that seems to be a common theme that's coming out of this. So you can, and what he was saying about the data was he was in aviation, and he said we can get tons of data, absolutely, bags of it, but it's sorting out what is relevant to the risks that we're underwriting. And then, as Ben was saying, how do you then play it back to the client to offer more value? And that's where, it comes to your initial point around talent and innovation, skills and capabilities. And what are you trying to do, for your purpose, which is to serve customers and clients. So it's just a really interesting theme we've noticed over the last few shows.
And I think some of that Bruce was saying, I would completely agree with. And he was talking about being an entrepreneurial business where everybody's empowered, has a bit of a stake in the business. And he said that creates a culture, which is one in which people are curious and see the impact of their work and their ideas. And I wonder if we've lost a bit of that, or maybe a lot of that.
Well, I mean, you're often asked what are the key skills of a claims person. I always sort of say empathy and curiosity. And I think you're right. I think that we've all become very focused on things that are in front of us. And I mean, there's a wonderful story about Obama being asked to approve the Bin Laden exercise, and data being presented to him in all sorts of different ways as to what the probability is that Bin Laden was in that compound. And Obama just said, it's 50-50. He's either there or he's not. And I think that's the ability just, and okay, appreciate he's the President of the United States of America. But again, I've worked with colleagues who just have that absolute ability to just cut through and just say, that's what this is about. And I think that, that's where peer review is important and mentoring is important. And again, we talk about people, mentoring is a very important skill. And perhaps, when I close, I'll just make a comment, if I may, about that. But But I think you come back to, what should London be aiming for? Well, basically, you've got to serve customers. And London needs to understand risk, I think, and then understands how to price risk in a way that's interesting to the clients that come to us. And then, bluntly, we've got to deliver on claims. But one of the key things about claims that I feel sometimes we don't get the best value out is actually learning from claims, getting the feedback from claims. So we have events for claims people, and probably I have to be careful what I say, but this whole thing about it's where the rubber hits the road, it's the shop window, and I'll perhaps come back a bit later on something about claims. But if you go to events, not many people take their claims person with them. And ultimately, what are clients actually buying? I heard is people say about balance sheet. Clients are buying cash protection as much as anything now, because most clients have got better balance sheets than their insurers. Yes, balance sheet is important, but they're trying to buy cash flow. They're trying to buy those protections, say. In other areas, they'll be buying different protections. And I think we just have to understand the nature of risk, go back to where we all started, look at customers and talk to them about what it is that's really on their agenda and price it well. I think that's one of the issues. And back to Jeremy's point, I think if we can do that, that starts to drive you forward because you've now got a purpose. And
we talk about, purpose and belief and things, but also that I think your point about parametrics and some of the products that the indemnity products and so on. I think the COVID has shown that actually maybe these aren't the right products for the sort of businesses we're selling to. Ultimately, that's one of the messages I take from it. Yeah. I think Warren Buffett has taken the same message because he just launched a product that is designed to kind of pull the rug out from under that, called 3. Yeah. But it does seem to me that the COVID thing, to a certain extent, that's things catching up where we haven't necessarily listened. And Jeremy and I both run small businesses, and we both said, well, we don't really need an indemnity product particularly, and we certainly don't want the hassle for that. We would just want a cash flow type product. And so why are we not? Why do you think we're not selling those? Is it just that we've lost that touch with the customers and knowing what they really want, or do we all think we're in insurance, so we've got to develop insurance products with lawyers who back them and all that? Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. We probably do sell cash flow products, but we don't recognise them as such. Actually, if you look in the energy market, particularly, the business interruption payments that have dominated our market over the last few years are perfect examples. You've only got to look at the London market wording, for offshore. And you look at the way it's done, and it talks about how payments can be made, and it talks about some formulas that are sensible. You see the same in mining. Most mine owners, that's what they're looking for, and we're good at it, but we forget to say that's what we're doing. And I think sometimes we just forget what we're doing. Business interruption, one can argue, is not the easiest of areas to write, but for a client, it's a really important area. And it does provide that support. And the market has done a lot of work in looking at suitable wording, particularly in the energy market in the last few years, and has come up with some thoughtful, constructed wordings that I think can deliver some real value for clients. I've seen them in practice.
Do you think on that point, Jonathan, because it seems perhaps that a lot of the good thinking has gone in, and I would totally agree with you in the energy classes that there are fantastic BI products that work really well for those sophisticated clients, but it just doesn't seem to me that it's trickled down into the SME and mid-markets, and that's where there's huge opportunities, but we've got very standard products and they don't seem to work all that well, and we don't communicate with them.
No, well, I think we use terms like gross profit, which you might, as others have said, you might as well just say elephant. What people are looking to do is to say, look, I've got a revenue stream. I want to protect my revenue stream. And I think if we started to use language like that and talk clearly and particularly work with our brokers around what that looks like, then I think we can start to open that market up. I think you're right, Ben. As it happens, actually, most of the standard wordings that are UK-based are pretty good wordings for most SMEs, but that's not how they're explained. And a lot of my time, even in the last few weeks, has been being phoned by friends of mine who are running SMEs saying, Can you just tell me what does this all mean? It's funny when you get loose, suddenly people come to you asking you questions like that, and you think, well, I think I know what it means, and then you realise actually, in the context of what that person's doing, it's meaningless. It's like a revenue product, and they accept that there'll be some savings, they accept that there'll be something happens, and they want to get some payment pretty quickly after something's happened. And I think that's exactly what we offer, but we don't explain it that way. Does that make sense, Ben?
It does, and I think the point about communication and education has been, we've touched on it before quite a lot. And I can remember talking to the FCA, who said that, compared with many, other sectors in the financial services market, the insurance industry is poor at communicating. And I think I don't think people would disagree with that, but I also think that it goes further than that, because we seem to have the habit of saying, let's not bring the customer into the conversation too much. Let's keep them at arm's length. And then, and maybe that's because, the way the commercials work is you don't have to tell it, it's just a promise and it might happen and it might not. And you don't want to talk about the claim and all that sort of thing. But perhaps that's where change really could happen, is if we said, look, actually, let's talk to people about what claims are really like, so they understand it. And then they might, God forbid, have a suggestion as to how your product would work better for them.
Yeah. And I think that's important as well. And I think also it starts to speak to another point, which I think Jeremy's picked up on, about, where's London aiming to be? Where do we need to be? And it is about being a bit more nimble, because I think that, you're right, Jeremy, things don't happen at a speed that they need to happen. We've got to be nimble. We've got to be responsive. I think that's absolutely a theme that we've explored already. And just, we've got to be better at explaining what we're doing when we provide a service to a client. And I'm not going to talk about product, because it's about a service that we're essentially promising. One of the challenges I still see in London is that we are a global market. We've got to be global in attitude. We've still got people who think 9 to 5 London is global. And my sense of it is that the earth goes round and it's 24/7. I know people who still get a nosebleed going from Fenchurch Street to Leadenhall Street. And we've got to recognise that in a global marketplace, you've got to have that feel for culture, for truly, where things are. I used to keep, because I'm not very good at geography, people always said to me, you fly places, how come you don't know where they are? And I said, well, it's the pilot's job to get me there, not mine. But I used to keep an atlas in my desk, because I just figured if I was talking to somebody and you're talking about a country that perhaps I wasn't quite sure where it was, and it sounds silly, but actually I could then know it was in that part, and I knew what was next door, and actually knew I'd been somewhere nearby. But also I could see the time zone, so I could get a sense of whether it was their breakfast or it was their evening. Yeah. And I know these things sound very trivial, but whenever I work in the States, there's nothing worse than saying to somebody, well, hope you enjoy your supper, when they've yet to have lunch. And the converse. And I know these things are very trivial, but they're all about how we set an environment for London, I think. That's my take. But it's all about then focusing back to the customer, to the point Jeremy and Ben are raising, and helps us shake off that sort of slightly fusty image that occasionally gets put out around us, because you then talk to people who really do know. This is what's happening. These people are 10 hours different to us, or this is happening, and if you look at how, again, some of the call centres were trained, if you're going to be in a global marketplace, perhaps you should read the news for the countries you're trading in.
Yeah.
So that when you're talking to a client, you've got a feel for what's happening, and you look at how the call centres do it, where they train people on what's happening on Coronation Street, or what's happening on Emmerdale, or what's happening on Death in Paradise.
Yeah.
And that's a real customer focus that sometimes we don't always get, I think. And again, for me, that's part of a little bit of where we need to be, about inclusive and just really thinking about where our customers come from. I'm sorry we talked about customers all the time. It's a bad habit. I think Jeremy can probably work out where we're going to go with the next question about who's running the show.
So it's always good listening back to the conversation. It's fascinating. I just wrote down some kind of diversity to begin with, and then learning from claims. We talked about the siloed nature of insurance a lot, and And I think they are starting to break that down, and then build into communications, then back to mindset and culture and around customers. And it's just it's fascinating. I love talking to Jonathan. I think he's got a lot of experience and a lot to say and add to the conversation.
Yeah, he has, and actually, I think the points he makes. I mean, that one at the end there about the personal touch point is not just a trivial point, and he said that it's really about what he's really talking about is understanding the customer and that sort of fuzzy interface that you have with customers. And I think too often we talk in the insurance market about data as if it's some kind of monolithic thing. That answer you had earlier on about legacy systems, it's like, my God, what are we going to do because we've got legacy systems? But actually, a large part of data that you use in the trading and the sales that we're talking about is the fuzzy stuff, is the stuff, the little bits and pieces. And what I think Jonathan is alluding to there is if you don't do that work at the small stuff, you don't get to know what the customer's really about. And this happens institutionally, I think, a lot. And that's why the market is so slow. And we've heard various people on this show talking about the same sort of thing, Bruce a few weeks ago and others. And it reminds me, there was a quick sort of story I was reading this week about GE, which was very good at data, or they thought they were, but they also institutionalized and globalized their use of data. And one of the things that they saw, the trends that they saw coming up, was that houses were getting, people were buying smaller houses and living in smaller properties, and therefore they deduced from that they needed to make smaller appliances, fridges and cookers and so on. But what they missed was that actually, if they'd actually talked to customers or any of the retailers, which they didn't bother to because they thought they knew everything from this big data set, that actually it was the kitchens and the kind of living areas that were growing. So all these houses were getting smaller, and fridges were getting bigger because housewives were actually buying bigger fridges because they didn't want to go to the supermarket so often. And so they ended up making all these small appliances which didn't sell, and they had a problem. So, and I think the insurance industry is a bit like that. Is that we kind of have these big solutions, and as I said in that piece, we're not really listening. No, we're not really talking to customers. We're not getting those little anecdotal things. I think some of the smaller businesses are. I think some of the the up and coming ones are. I think Bruce talked about that. I think some of the insure tech businesses are. And it's interesting. I think if you think of that lemonade thing, and all the criticism it gets, and how everybody, all the kind of people in the institution say, "Well, what a load of rubbish! It'll never succeed," and yet it does, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, and that kind of befuddles people who are in institutions because they think there's only one way of doing it. They think there's only the way that we've always done it, which is to do it in an institutional, slow, methodical way with all the regulation wrapped around it. There isn't this nimble thing, which Jonathan talked about. So I think there's some really good points that Jonathan makes, and we should just keep holding on to those and working at them.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for just that 15-minute clip for ages. I mean, the things that are changing, the way organizations need to think about their customer. We ran a session yesterday, which was mainly GI focused, but looking at delivering consistent customer experience across it. If you've got a large organization, how do you do that? Especially when you've got different channels to communicate to your customers through, voice, chat, email, letters, even. And one of the participants made the point that we always talk about the next generation without actually dealing with this generation of business owners and consumers that are digital. They are digital native, and they are running organizations and they are making decisions. And quite often the conversation is about, in 5 years' time, the types of organizations will this, or the types of customers will be this. And I think we just got to start going, well, it's not in 5 years' time, it's now. And that speed of change, those changing expectations around what customer service looks like, how you're treated, the empathy stuff that Jonathan was talking about, the small things, are really important. And how you deliver that in a multi-channel, predominantly digital environment is challenging. It's not insurmountable, but organizations need to get a grip and start to do stuff, and that's what frustrates me about the pace of change. It's just, can we just do something?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that point of going to the customer and actually doing those little bits and pieces and listening. And I'll give you another quick thing this week. I've been reflecting on, but I've just been renewing. I said it last week, renewing my professional indemnity insurance for Grace Church, and it's been the most kind of ridiculous experience. I mean, I know it's the same every year, and I knew that before, but the more I reflect on it, the more ridiculous it is, because everything that's been said to me is about the problem that the insurance industry has in giving me this product. So we've got to look at are you exposed in the US? Because we can't do that. Have you got this exposure? Oh, sorry, you work for an insurance company, so there'll be a conflict with any of the insurance companies we work with. Every single thing has been them talking about the obstacles to giving me this bloody product. It's driven me mental, and the broker, quite frankly, because they've then gone, well, the underwriter says this and that and the other. But what you've got is a chain of communication that simply does not include me as the customer. It has no conception that I have needs. It just says, we can't do this because we might lose money if you do, and I obviously don't care about that. I just want to know, what can this help me to do? I've not been told one specific benefit of buying the product. All I've got is, I've got you a better price slightly than the last one, and it's all right. We can do it. Oh, wow, amazing. You can actually give me, a small business, a PI product. And it's like, what business is this? It's just not like any other business I can think of. Like, they grudgingly let you have the product as long as probably you're not going to get paid out, because that's the message.
Yeah.
Shocking, really.
Anyway, next week we have the final installment of the interview with Jonathan, and then what I'll do on the website, I'll put all of them together so you can watch it in one go without us interrupting it and getting in the way of your viewing. So there we go. So let's move things on. What are you doing this weekend, Ben? Anything?
No, nothing at all this weekend. I'm gonna do a little bit of work and a walk, and that's it. Yeah, nothing very much, really.
Yeah, I don't think so either. It's a beautiful day, so it feels a lot more hopeful. So probably just mess around with the kids. So there we go.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for tuning in. Paul dropping us a text. Interesting developments in DA space. Tech. Yeah, we'll have a look at. We should have a look at DA, shouldn't we, Ben?
Yeah, we should definitely do that, because I know things are moving there. Yeah, maybe we'll get Paul on.
Yeah, Paul, we'll give you a call about that. And but yeah, it's interesting about that. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you next week, and have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend, all. Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap up.